Christian de la Huerta, I am so pleased to be introducing you here at the festival. You're a good example. Christian is a good example of one of those guys who's been out there working in the breathing world on his own, quietly, very powerfully. And I've been following him for years. He's sort of been following me for years from a distance. We've each been in our own spheres. And in the last few years, we've connected more closely, more deeply. I love the work that Christian is doing. And I really love his current focus. I'm going to let him talk about that. And for now, I'm just going to introduce Christian de la Huerta. Thank you so much for being part of the festival and for this contribution. I love your work, and I love that you're making a difference in the world. So everyone, here's Christian. It's all yours, Christian. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. I'm so privileged to be here as part of the Breathing Festival, helping us all change our breath and change the world. And I'm honored to be among so many people whose work I've known about for decades, including yourself. So thank you, and thank you for being the fulcrum around which all of this is coming together. I want to talk a little bit about heroism, about power, and the breath. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and then I'm going to end this time with a guided meditation on the breathing process to help us center and empower and connect. So COVID has forced all of us to expand how we think of heroism. It used to be that when we thought of heroes, we would conjure up images of superheroes or maybe warriors or first responders, people who place their lives at risk for the sake of someone else or for the sake of a greater cause. Now we include, in addition to warriors and first responders, all the healthcare personnel, the doctors, the nurses, the respiratory therapists. And we even include, or we even think of our grocery clerks and our delivery people who have literally placed themselves in some degree of risk and their families to make sure that the system get going and to make sure that we all got fed and received all the product that we needed to keep going. And what about the rest of us? In some ways, you could say that just being able to maintain a sense of self and center and equanimity in the midst of this chaos in which we have lived and in which we live, that in itself is heroic. But I'd like to speak a little bit more about that and talk about what it means to live a heroic life in the 21st century, when we may not have the horse hitched outside, and the armors and the demons to slay, except the ones inside of our heads. So I'm writing a 3-part series on that theme. And the first book, which was just published, is Awakening the Soul of Power, which talks about how we step into power, into personal power, in a way that's not about hierarchy, control, fear, force, domination, manipulation, type of power that doesn't require that we squelch anybody, step on them in order to prop ourselves up and feel powerful. So how do we do that? How does a hero or heroine do that? And by the way, I'm going to use the word hero generally for all of us because heroine kind of smacks of something else. And to be going back and forth gets a little boring too as a speaker, and to be listening to me do that. So the thing about power is that most of us have an ambivalent relationship to it. We want it, but we're afraid of it. And no wonder, because every day when we watch the news and when we read the morning headlines, we're witnessing and hearing about horrible abuses of power. And in our lives, how many times have we been present to abuses of power and on either side of that equation? So good-hearted people that we are, we don't want to abuse power. And then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is bad, with quotes and beliefs like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, but what they forgot to tell us is that quote from Lord Acton was originally intended to describe political power, not the personal power, that we're talking about here. Because what happens, we combine all of that with the fact that we've also been conditioned to run away from the emotions, to be afraid of our emotions. So we've conditioned to suppress all of our emotional experience, which as breathwork people we know about. So when you combine all those things, no wonder we have an ambivalent relationship to power. And so what happens is that we end up stuffing ourselves, stuffing our truth, stuffing our dreams, and like putting ourselves into smaller little packages. How many times have we said yes when inside we really felt no? How many times have we gotten stuck in power struggles? How many times have we like suppressed our true feelings in order to avoid those power struggles, in order to avoid conflict, confrontation? So it's really critical, I know, for that we learn how to navigate this question of power, which is up for us, not only individually, because if we don't figure this out, and if we continue suppressing ourselves and our truth, what we're risking is a life of self-devouring mediocrity. And as a world, as a people, what we're risking is just killing each other, right? And in the name of God, ironically. So really critical that we learn how to navigate this issue of power. And the more that I've been thinking about this for a number of years now. And by the way, I should say that the way that it came about was that I had submitted a proposal to an agent that I was working with in New York, and it's on a different subject. And she said to me, "I don't know if you know anything about a book proposal, but it's a huge term paper, including a marketing analysis and how you're going to get your message out there and what you're this person to write about this message." And the agent said, "Yeah, I wanna work with you, but I want to see some of these marketing ideas implemented before we present it to a publisher." And for me, it was like putting the brakes on, because I was already spending the advance in my mind. And so then that sent me into kind of a personal crisis for a few days, as what do I do now? And then it hit me, it's like, what would I really write about if I were not writing for that advance? And about a month before, sitting in meditation, for only the second time in my life, then now it's happened 3 times, but this is only the second time where I actually heard audible words in meditation. And those words were the soul of power. And it's like, wow, I came out of meditation. It's like, wow, that's really cool. What an interesting concept. I got the URL and forgot about it. So in the middle of this 3-day crisis, it occurred to me. It's like it finally dawned onto me, one of these duh moments. And the thought was, if I really believe that the single most important thing that needs to happen in our world is the empowerment of women, which I've been saying for years, then what am I doing about that specifically? And then soul of power, empowering a woman, it was like, duh. And the reason I believe that, by the way, is not that I'm putting women up on a pedestal, but it's because we've been living and functioning incredibly out of balance for the last several thousand years. And so, yes, the system, the patriarchal system, has been incredibly oppressive to women, and just enough, like it's unacceptable. And my belief is that when women are in 50% of power, we'll have a very different relationship to everything, to all the problems that we face as a species. So including war and poverty, hunger, how we treat the environment, social justice, distribution of wealth, all of it. And so again, that's what drove this message and my desire to write this book, so that we find a way of talking about power that is different, and that we can find a way to express our own power without that having that ambivalence towards it, a sense of that way of expressing power that is a match for who we are. So one of the first realizations I had about that, which I write, by the way, which I write about in this book, in which we're going to share with you a screen of, is realizing that there are different types of power. And so we have worldly power, the way that the world thinks of power, And then we have soulful power. Worldly power I also refer to as egoic power. And in retreats and events where I have more time, it's really important that we get to understand, like really get how the ego works. And just to speaking briefly about it at this moment, we can think of the ego as a part of the mind that makes sense of sensory information. It synthesizes sensory information. It can reach into the past. It can project into the future, and somehow weave all of that information into a coherent sense of self, like a sense of personality. This is Christian. That's Dan, right? So it's ultimately it's an illusion, and it's both a helpful illusion. And the source of all our suffering. Ken Wilber, who writes brilliantly about this stuff, talks about how humanity hasn't always had a sense of self. That at some point in human evolution, we didn't have a sense of individual identity. We therefore felt at one with all of creation, with all the other creatures on this planet. And that at some point, there was a leap in consciousness and the ego, like the ego was born, the individual identity. We can think of it as Homo sapiens sapiens. Now, humans, we can translate that as humans who know that we know. So the ego is that self-reflective consciousness that allows us to reflect back upon ourselves. So it's both huge in terms of evolution. As far as we know, we're the only species that has a sense of self. There's some theories about the whales and the dolphins, the elephants and the higher primates. But we don't really know. Like they'll do some studies, so that we've seen the YouTube videos. You put a dog or a cat in front of a mirror, and they interact. They start playing or interacting, fighting with that image as if it was another dog or cat. If you put a higher primate like a chimp or a gorilla in front of a mirror and you put ash on them, at some point they'll go like this. So indicating that something else is going on, like they get that image is them. But whether we can leap to having a sense of self, we're not quite able to do that yet. Like we know we have a sense of self. And again, leap in evolution and the source of all our suffering, because as the ego was born, it's like that was the first split in consciousness. Like now we can have a sense of separateness. We can have abandonment issues like so many of us do. Another kind of thing that also comes up in breathwork for those of us who are breathwork practitioners. We can have a sense of our own mortality. So again, really, really important that we understand how the ego works, because in its limited perception, it's like one image that is really helpful to understand is if you put a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego is. Who we are is actually the stadium. But we've allowed this tiny, tiny, infinitesimal part of who we are to think that it is all of who we are. So it's a confusion in identification. It's good. We think we're the baseball. We're actually a freaking stadium. And so the problem with that is that we've in giving our power away to this tiny part of who we are, we end up making really important and critical decisions about our lives. Do I go and get into that relationship? Do I leave this relationship? Do I take that job opportunity that requires that I leave my comfort zone and my circle of friends and move to a different part of the country? We all important questions, but the problem is that we're making them from this tiny perspective, and always fear-based perspective. So really critical that we understand how the ego works, how it limits our thinking, how it screws with us, because it's also that harsh inner voice, that critical voice that's inside of our heads, and so that we no longer allow ourselves to be limited and be controlled by its fearful perspective. So anyway, that's a long way of explaining what I mean by egoic power, which is the way that the world relates to power. So a couple of important things about the difference between worldly power and soulful power or spiritual power. One has external focus. So what does that mean? That means that we tend to associate power with certain things that are external to us, like people who have money, right? Those are the type of people we think have power, money, fame, people who are part of some hierarchy, whether it's a corporate structure or religious hierarchy or even a social hierarchy. So again, things that are outside of us, and because of that, they're here today and can be gone tomorrow. As opposed to soulful power, spiritual power, which comes from within. And nobody can give that to us and nobody can take it away. Worldly power, egoic power, is self-serving. So it always has an agenda. It's always trying to grab something, to get something for itself. As opposed to soulful power, which is about service. It's about making a difference in this world. And I want to say a little bit about service because I think it's a fair assumption that most of us who are here listening to this or participating in this breathing festival are about making a difference. So we're service-oriented people. And that's another thing that we've had to navigate too and figure out that self-care is not selfish. Because we can think about it in this way, and I learned this from a friend. Think about service as a trifecta or a tripod of power of service. So one of the legs is service to the divine, service to the universe. The second leg is service to humanity, service to the world. The third leg, service to self, and which is the one that most of us service-oriented people tend to neglect and forget about. And if we don't take care of that one, the other two cannot stand. So it's what they tell us. First thing they tell us when we fly, right? Very first thing is we'll put on your mask before even that of a child. So going forward for us service-oriented people, self-service is not only not selfish, but it's mandatory, right? If we want to fulfill our purpose and take care of and make a difference in this world, we've got to take care of ourselves first, because if not, what happens is that we start giving and giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, we start burning out and we start becoming resentful of all that giving because we've got it set up that we're not receiving in return because we're not taking responsibility for ourselves. So then that service eventually turns into servitude. And we get bitter and resentful about it. So let's not do that, right? Self-care mandatory so that we can really step into our purpose and make the difference that we're all here to make. Worldly power, by definition, is hierarchical. So it requires that somebody be below me. So it's power over, right? And how evident, like we in this last year, like we're again connecting it to the breath, and the importance of the breath were both pandemics, whether COVID or the systemic racism, were both about I can't breathe. Right, so power over is that it's like it requires that I put my knee to somebody's neck to prop myself up and feel powerful. The other one is power with. So the power over is exclusive, right? And whereas power with is, I mean, one is the power with is exclusive. I mean, power over is exclusive. Right, so it comes from the belief that there's a limited amount of power, so that power is a zero-sum game. So that you're having power takes away from mine. It's like, wait a minute, who says? Right, so the other one, spiritual power, comes from the premise that there's no limit to power, and if I have a sense of my own power, I'm not threatened by anybody else's power. One is self-aggrandizing. Right? So it kind of puffs itself up. It blows itself up. Think of a turkey in heat. If you've ever seen that, where they blow themselves up to be sexy, I guess, to female turkeys. That's worldly power. The other one is very humble. Right? Soulful power is very humble, and it just knows, and it doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. So think about Gandhi or Gandalf. In the Lord of the Rings, in their simple monastic robes, sandal feet, you would never know the power they hold until it's necessary, until it's called for. And when we think about this, like Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point, at its zenith in terms of global reach, without yelling, without landing a punch, without shooting a gun. Like, talk about power. Um, so soulful power is actually even more powerful um, because of its intrinsic nature. Whereas the other one, like we're witnessing, the other one is more fickle. It comes and it goes, and especially in these times where corporations are closing their doors, and we're having to learn. Like heroes are having to figure out, who are we going to place our trust on? What are we going to place our trust on? So one is fear-based, force-based, which we talked about too. So it attains its needs in a kind of strategic, conniving way. Machiavellian is probably the better word. So it's kind of like machinations. It knows, like in the workplace, it knows if I say to Mary that Robert is speaking badly about her behind her back, and I say to Robert the same thing about Mary, while they're going at each other, I swoop in and I take over the plum project. So that's worldly power. Soulful power is more intuitive. It's more body-based rather than mind-based. I think I'm going to stop here now and talk a little bit about breath and power. And given the limitations of our time, I wrote a book about that, so I could go much more deeply into it. But the important thing is to realize, as we transform our relationship to power, is that we just need to shift the way that we think about it, so that we can find a way of expressing it that is a match for who we are. And that there is a way for us to step into power in a way that is not going to be harmful, that we're not going to cause harm to others, that we can own this role of being stewards of power, and that we can use it in a conscious, intentional, mindful way that's going to make a difference, a positive difference, and that's going to lead to our own personal fulfillment. Because as I said before, as long as we keep acting as if we don't have power and shutting it down and selling out on our power and just giving it away to avoid conflict or confrontation, we are never going to have a sense of being fully expressed. So anyway, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the breath and power, because after all, that's what we're talking about here, is about how do we change our breath and how do we change the world. And so Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, talks about how the breath is the bridge which connects life to consciousness, which unites your body to your thoughts. Whenever your mind becomes scattered, he says, use your breath as the means to take hold of your mind again. And those of us who are here in this community, in this amazing festival, know the healing power of the breath. Those of us who have either are breathwork practitioners or who have experienced the power of the breath to heal, like, we know this. My personal relationship to, or history in relationship to the breath, is I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. My dad was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. When I discovered breathwork 30 years ago, my first session changed my life. Like, one session, after that one session, I knew that I had to do it again. I didn't care where I had to go. I didn't care what I had to do, what I had to pay, how much I had to pay. I knew I had to do it again. And I knew that I had to share it with others. And that shift meant that I never went for the PhD, because it works so fast and heals so profoundly at so many levels. Not only does it heal emotionally and psychologically, like, I don't know anything that heals past trauma as quickly and at so many levels as breathwork does. but it also heals mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. And I know that that sounds too good to be true, but like for those of us who have experienced the power of the breath, it's like we know. And it's like maybe scientifically we can't quite explain its power and how it works. I don't think that science is there yet in terms of explaining the process. But here's a more spiritual approach to understanding um, the power of the breath and the healing power of the breath. And like we all know, the breath is a constant. It's the common denominator in every spiritual practice and in every meditation technique, and integral to yoga. Um, and in fact, in most spiritual traditions, one word can mean either spirit or breath. Um, so, for example, in from the Latin word spirare, from that root we get both respiration and inspiration. In from the ancient Greek pneuma, the word from which we get pneumonia, that word pneuma meant both soul and breath, and on and on, and like anda in the secular language of Swedish, prana in Sanskrit, in Aramaic, in Hebrew, ruach. Uh, Both, depending on the context, can mean either spirit or breath. Um, and we know too. I mean, it's kind of intuitive. Like the breath is our most loyal, our most faithful companion on this journey of embodiment. So, I don't think it ultimately explains how simply breathing, can heal the most severe past traumas. Like many people here, I've worked with people, I mean, intense trauma, rape and sex abuse and violent death of loved ones. And from personal experience, I know that it heals, and that it does so with permanent results, like irreversibly. Um, and so we also know that the breathing, like one of the things that COVID has helped us to realize is that different breathing practices can help to boost up the immune system. And I'll weave one of those into the guided meditation that I'll headed to in a couple of minutes. And the reason that like really important on this journey of embodiment and this journey of empowerment, that we learn how to use the breath consciously. Because what happens is when we're going through our days and the emotions come up, whether it's fear or anger or sadness, like immediately we stop breathing, we cut out the breath, and we start taking shallow breaths. And that's what anchors those traumas and those emotions in the tissues of the body. Like what used to be spiritual teaching, that everything is energy, now we know from quantum physics that it's true. Everything is energy, and that includes the body, that includes the emotions. We know from physics also that energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change form. So when we have a strong psycho-emotional experience and we stop breathing, and what we're doing is we're effectively suppressing it. And that's what anchors it in the tissues of the body. And what happens, the problem with that is that after years of suppressing our emotions and decades of doing that, we begin to walk around with layers upon layers upon layers of emotional crap. And so here we are in the present, trying to have a relationship, and all of it is getting filtered through that lifetime of suppressed emotional crap and unhealed trauma, which we then start projecting onto and throwing on each other's lap. It's like, yikes. How any relationships work boggles my mind. Like, it doesn't surprise me that more than 50% of the marriages, at least in this country, in the US, end up in divorce. What does surprise me is that 100% don't. because we haven't been taught how to hold our emotions, and we certainly haven't been taught how to empty ourselves out of this cauldron of emotions, which is so critically important that we learn how to do, because not only is it interfering with our relationships, but it's also causing great harm in our relationships, because we suppress and we suppress and we suppress, and then the next unfortunate comes by and they rub us the wrong way, and volcanic eruption inappropriately to that particular example. Or suppress, that energy has to come out one way or another, right? So then if we don't give it expression, it's going to start revealing itself through the body, right? Like we're going to start developing bodily symptoms, disease, cancer, heart attacks, ulcers, right? That energy has to come out one way or another. So critical that we learn to understand our emotions, that we make peace with our emotions and learn how to express them in a way that, again, is responsible, that is courageous, because we're always going to be it's scary when we feel our emotions, and it's scary to express them. What's scarier is that another year, 5 years, 10 years, 40 years will go by and we haven't, and we're still suppressing our emotions. There will be a serious price to pay for that. And that's one of the other beauties of this breath work, of this breathing modality that we're here talking about in this festival. Through the breath, I don't know anything more effective in emptying ourselves of this cauldron of suppressed emotions. And one last thing about this, it's really important that we learn how to express them and to communicate them gracefully. And that means in a way that people can hear it, right? Because one of the ways that we can think about this, it's like becoming like children, like the biblical saying, which we think about kids having, a 2-year-old having a major meltdown, a total meltdown, a total tizzy fit. 2 minutes later, they're playing like if nothing happened. Like, that's because they're having their emotional experience fully. So they have that emotion fully, then they're on to the next emotion. And important to realize the emotion, like, again, that they're just energies that are coursing through us. And so that we can learn how to have our emotions rather than be had by them. We as adults get into trouble with the emotions because we suppress them. And as long as we're suppressing them, what happens is that our anger, which is just an energy, is not good, is not bad, it's just an energy. If we suppress it, it turns into rage. And then it's a problem, right? Because then we walk around like cauldrons of rage, just waiting to explode. Our sadness, again, just a normal emotional energy. If we suppress it and suppress it, it starts congealing. It gets frozen into depression. So again, that's one of the reasons that the breath is so effective in bringing about healing and taking us to our authentic self and to our power, is that it clears all this emotional gunk that we've been walking around with. So I'm going to wrap it up now and start moving into the guided meditation that I wanted to share with you. So if you can sit comfortably now, and if you can, uncross your limbs, if your spine, if it's possible, if you can have it straight, that would be great. And close your eyes if that feels comfortable, because that allows us to drop into ourselves more easily, by eliminating visual stimuli. And we begin to notice our breath. That we begin to bring attention to our breath. And in so doing, we begin to allow the breath to slow down, to deepen. And we let it be natural, because the breath wants to breathe us this way. That's its natural state. A slow, deep, relaxing breath. And if we can imagine that we can hold hands with the breath, we allow it to guide us gently by the hand deeper and deeper into ourselves, right? Into that universe that for most of us tragically remains unexplored. So we drop down into the depths of ourselves, little by little, one breath at a time. And we begin to notice any thoughts that might be coursing through us, any emotional energies that also may be coursing through our bodies. And again, we just notice them without attaching to them. So imagining that we're standing on a train station, right? And we're just observing, right? The trains come in and they go right back out. The emotions come in and they're, without attaching to them, we're just noticing them and let them go back out. At some point, we may find ourselves that we got into the train and we find ourselves a couple of stations down, checking a to-do list or thinking about what we're going to do tomorrow. No worries. We just notice and we bring ourselves back to the station, back to just noticing the breath, noticing the inhale and noticing the exhale, and allowing ourselves again to drop a little more deeply into ourselves. And the beauty of the breath is that there are swamis in India that have that much control over their bodies that they can tell their heart to slow down, and they will. The heart slows down. Some of them can even mimic states that are so close to death, that they're so death-like that it's hard to tell the difference. Most of us aren't there yet and may never get to that level of autonomy over the bodily functions. But anybody can slow down the breath, right? All it takes is attention and intention. When we slow down the breath, the heart has no choice. It has to slow down. And so we allow that to happen right now, right? As we slow down the breath even more, the heart begins to slow down, it begins to relax. And then the body begins to quiet down, the nervous system begins to relax. And we can allow ourselves to drop in even further now and to feel completely safe, always a choice. As we continue allowing the breath to slow down and to deepen. And you might even play for a moment with this simple technique, which helps to build the immune system. So breathing in slowly, and then breathing out slowly. Once your lungs are completely empty, hold the breath for 5 seconds. And then just breathe again normally for another few breaths. And when it feels right again to do so, hold again for 5 seconds. And this type of breathing is good to do in and out the nose, because when we breathe in and out the nose in this way, it helps to release nitric oxide, which has antiviral effects and which is produced in the nose. So you can do that on your own as we continue dropping in, as you continue relaxing. And I want to talk a little bit about the element of argon, which is an inert element, which means that it is immutable. It never changes form. So unlike oxygen, then when we breathe it in, it gets transformed and transmuted and expelled as carbon dioxide. When we breathe in argon, we release it in the same form. So it's the same old argon that's been around for eon, which has never changed forms. Which, when we think of it, means that the argon that's going through our lungs right now, this moment, is the very same argon that went through the lungs of the pterodactyl and the woolly mammoth, and the saber-toothed tiger. The very same argon that went through the lungs of the Hebrew prophets and the Hindu masters 3,000 years before the current era. The very same argon that was breathed by the Buddha and Confucius and Lao Tzu about 500 years BCE. The exact same argon that went through the lungs of Jesus and Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene about 2,000 years ago. The very same argon that was breathed by Leonardo and Michelangelo, by Marie Curie and Joan of Arc, by Gandhi and Dr. King, by Abraham and King David and Muhammad, by Mother Teresa and Princess Diana. The same argon that went through the lungs of all the masters and the greatest scientists and our most creative, artistic minds throughout history. That very same argon is going through our lungs. That same argon that went through the lungs of all the light carriers and the truth speakers throughout history, going through our lungs right now. So breathe that in. Breathe that in. And allow it to inform us. And when we think about, that more than 99% of the atoms, is like 99.99 something percent of the atoms in our bodies were present at the moment of the Big Bang. I mean, and it's 99% of the atoms in our body are the same atoms that the stars are made of, so that we can literally say, not just poetically, that we are star beings, that we are made of star stuff, and that 60% of the hydrogen atoms in our body were more present at the moment of the Big Bang. So we connect with both our cosmic heritage, our star beingness, our cosmic nature, and with the power that is inherent to all of that. That is who we are. We are cosmic beings. We are star beings. We are heroic beings. Remembering our potential at this most critical time in the evolution of humanity. And so how will we choose to express that? How will we choose to allow our own unique piece of sacred real estate to manifest itself at this time, which is all hands on deck time? In the same way that I know that it's a safe assumption that you're here because you're about making a difference and about service, I think it's also a self-assumption. It's a safe assumption to say that you've got, if you're not already expressing the role of teacher or the role of healer in some way, that at some level you've had an inkling that you've got some role to play in this time of awakening, this dramatic time in the evolution of humanity. And so that's what I mean, that it's a time for heroes. And that it's all hands on deck, that if we've had the slightest suspicion, this is it. This is the time that we have been preparing for. So slowly, we begin to bring ourselves back. And we bring back with us all that remembering, all that awareness, all of that cosmic connectedness, and all of that connectedness with all those light carriers and truth speakers throughout history, our brightest, our best. Right? And we commit or recommit to allow that heritage to express itself through us now. All hands on deck. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. Thank you so much for answering the call to heroism. And thank you for the willingness to change your breath and to change your world.